This is the Chucktown Wind Report Extended Weekday Outlook from Tuesday, September the 1st through Friday, September the 4th. Okay, so we are getting into the month of September and we're starting to see a couple of these little cool air events drop down to the southeast region. This past Friday we had quite a northeast event or east-northeast event as we had high pressure to the north actually drive some cooler air down the coastline. Now it does take even a difference of 5 to 7 degrees cooler air in order to increase the gradient. Which brings the winds up even higher. So the last couple of times that we had high pressure to the north, we didn't see that much of a difference. But this past Friday, we did see, and it brought the forecast from 13 to 17 knots up to 22 to 23 knot peaks. So that's something that we start looking at as we get into the cooler months as we head towards fall. But for right now, what we have is we have a large weak ridge of high pressure to our west, and we also have a very weak Bermuda high out here to the east. So what we're looking at down here in the Gulf is remnants of Erica, and there's a very, very outside small chance of her redeveloping as a minimal tropical storm at best. But for the most part, she's going to remain a wave, and the moisture streaming up from the south, and this is what brought us all that rain yesterday, is we had a mid to upper level low that was here over Georgia that was just bringing all this moisture up from remnants of Erica and from the Gulf of Mexico moisture up into our area, and we ended up with about 6.5 inches in Charleston. There was lots of flooding. It was a very, very intense rain event ahead of that mid to upper level low as it went up the coastline and is now situated off the North Carolina coast where some of this moisture is wrapping around to the Outer Banks. For right now, what we have is a westerly flow coming down the mountainsides, lee side of the Appalachian Mountains from these high pressures, and as they get towards the coastline, they're sort of bending a little bit more to the north, so we have kind of a northwesterly flow going on. This is representative of our offshore land breezing is what we typically have from this, and then as we have this Bermuda high ridging in a very weak southerly flows. Like I said, it's a very weak high pressure, especially with this troughing offshore. It's not able to really get a surface flow pushing through it to increase the synoptics. So what we're left with is we have this land breezing northwesterly wind that will eventually turn with abundant sunshine and sea breezing effect will turn southerly, probably some southeasterlies mixed in right along where this moisture is and this clouding where this high pressure is weak. I'm expecting more of a flattened high pressure where the ridge axis is somewhere in here. And wherever this ridge axis is, if it drifts to the north, we'll see more of a south wind. If it drifts to the south, we'll see more of a southeasterly wind. Either way, that's a little bit on the technical side, but for right now, let's just say very mild to modest southerly winds. We're looking at about 8 to 12 knots today. Another weak pattern again for tomorrow. We do have a higher chance for a small build to reach low teens. So we're looking at 9 to 13 knots, 10 to 14 tops. I don't see anything really reaching 15 knots for tomorrow. I think we're going to stay in the low teens. And then as we get back into Thursday, we're still stuck in this situation where this high pressure stays weak and returns to a more similar pattern to what we're seeing today. Now, as we get into this weekend, I really want to watch. This low is going to travel down along the boundary. This segment of the stationary front will weaken and dissipate. And then what we have is we have high pressure building down from Canada again, and it's going to build all the way down into the south, into the northeast United States. And what that means for us is that we're going to get another blast of northeast winds at some point, or even east-northeast winds. This could start Friday, and we could be seeing an early build of 11 to 15 knots. Those initial pulses may bring it up higher than that with that cooler air spilling down. What that does is cooler air comes down the coastline and it advects into the coast. It sort of comes down at an angle, and with heating we get an inland sea breezing effect. And it's not a circulation like we have from the south. It's a different kind of sea breeze. We call it backdoor sea breezing, where it's more of an oscillation. It sort of just feeds into inland storming and accelerates right over the coastline as cooler air meeting with the warmer land, and that increases the temperature gradient and increases our wind speed. So we're looking at Friday possibly arriving and starting to see the build, and then into Saturday a stronger build, and then to Sunday we're looking at it peaking out. So we're getting a little bit ahead of ourselves there, but just throwing that out there as a possibility for the weekend. Okay, so I want to look at the infrared loop, and we're not seeing very much in the way of clouding, maybe some cloud debris reaching up into Charleston. This high pressure over the Appalachians should keep the western side of the state, mid-state, dry, and as we get to the coastline, it's going to try to suppress a lot of this moisture. It doesn't mean we won't see rains or storms. We may see those in the form of thunderstorms later as the mild sea breeze circulations get underway, but for the most part, we're not going to see anything near what we had yesterday with this atmospheric river of moisture streaming into the area. And when we see the water vapor loop, we can see some of that, this more of a mid to upper level here, and then more of a surface level moisture down here in northern Florida, where the sort of thinner area is here. That's where more of the moisture is. So we're not looking too bad on the side of rain. I think we're going to get a chance to dry out today. Now, looking at the earth.nullschool.net, we're looking at Africa. So let me go back over here to our area. Go over back to our neck of the woods. That load, and let me put the dot on Charleston, and we can see how weak this high pressure ridge is out here over Bermuda. It's right about here. The southerly flow is very weak. It tends to taper off right here off of our coastline. You can see it has a hard time getting to shore because of that trough that's sitting across out to the ocean. Here's that mid to upper level low that was over Georgia. Is now surface low since it's hit the water. It's gotten a little bit of a surface rotation, but nothing. It's getting over cooler water, so we're not anticipating anything there. But it is affecting the Outer Banks right now. You can see the pinch between that high pressure and low pressure is where we were situated yesterday, and that's where we were getting all that moisture from. Okay, so we look at data scope from weather flow. We see this northwesterly flow going on this morning through the area. Let's take a look at the Fort Sumter Front Range light. This is in the harbor next to Fort Sumter. If we look at the models, I want to take a quick peek at all of the different runs that we have. And we see this northwesterly flow. Now, most of the models come into agreement around 5 p.m. for a southeast flow. I'm looking at the high resolution rapid refresh, keeping the offshore flow all the way until early afternoon before that southerly switch, and that seems more reasonable given how much the built high pressure inland pushing that northwesterly flow. I could probably agree with this a little bit more in the other models. I don't think we would see an easterly. I think we would see more of a south-southeast or southeast flow later this afternoon. And as we get into tomorrow, like I said, we have a higher chance of getting a stronger build into tomorrow to low teens on the southerly wind. Now, the more southwest the winds go, the more of a chance we have at getting a higher build. That's a stronger sea breeze direction with land heat, and as the winds tilt with the Coriolis effect, we end up getting a stronger wind than what the models can come up with just based on the sea breeze circulations at hand, especially if we have some inland troughing feeding the return flow back out into the ocean and back inland or back into the coastline. That sometimes will help drive those winds up about 2 or 3 extra knots on a weekday that we can't see coming. So that's going to be the norm. Pretty weak pattern for this week. And as we get into Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, that's when things will change and we'll see that cooler air drop down. So I wanted to take a look at the tropics. Now, if we go back to earth.nullschool.net, I want to head over here to Africa. I want to talk about Fred for a little bit and then a possible tropical wave. Fred is now a tropical storm. His winds are 65 miles an hour. He's weakened. His winds were 80 miles an hour as a hurricane as he passed through the Cape Verde Islands. And as he heads off to the west-northwest, we're going to see a weakening phase. And one of the reasons why is because of upper level shear. Now, if we go to the upper levels, we see this westerly wind shear starting to have its effects now. We see this upper level low this way. There's no way he's going to be able to get down and around this upper level low, head to the west to get back down into the warmer waters. So he's just going to encounter cooler waters with upper level shear. He's also going into the Saharan dust, which was a little bit stronger yesterday, and he's really gotten involved with this heavier or moderate layer of dust. Now the yellows represent modest, the orange is more moderate, and the red is thicker. And we see this tropical wave coming in behind him. Now this wave is going to have a much better chance of developing, probably not as fast as Fred did. Fred actually had almost no dust to deal with when he came off the coastline and very favorable conditions, but he's really cleared out a lot of the dust ahead of this tropical wave. So this tropical wave definitely has a better chance of surviving through that element. So if we look at the rainbow top, you see Fred as he heads through the islands. You can see that upper level shear really taking the cloud tops off to the northeast at that last frame, and the new tropical wave coming off. And so we'll have to keep an eye on that. The National Hurricane Center gives that wave about a 20% chance to develop it over the next 5 days. And it could fall apart, so nothing's for certain yet, but just something to keep an eye on. And if we get into the peak season, we see September 10th. We're at September 1st. That's only 9 days away for the peak of the hurricane season. And that's when we see a lot of these systems really develop off of the coast of Africa, is the Cape Verde season, where the intertropical convergence zone produces the most activity further north of the equator off of the coast of Africa, and that's what we start to see. And then some of these storms can actually track west all the way across the Atlantic, and that's what we're looking at getting into. Once we get past September the 10th, the chances start to fall off, and we get into our cooler months and the waters start to cool. So if we go back to our rainbow top, you can see the sea surface temperatures are dropping off to 27 degrees Celsius where Fred is now, and then off the coast of Africa where this wave is, you see 30 degrees Celsius. That's much more favorable water. Even 3 degrees makes a big difference. So that's pretty much it for the tropics update. And if we go back to our surface map, okay, so on a recap, we have today 8 to 12 knots from the south or south-southeast. Tomorrow, Wednesday, we see a little bit more of a build at about 9 to 13 knots, maybe 10 to 14 knots, depending on how much of a sea breeze circulation we get and how the inland trough setup is for the return flows out into the ocean back into the coastline for those circulations. And then as we get back into Thursday, we still see the weak pattern. This pattern is pretty much going to prevail through the week. And as we get into Friday, we start to see this high pressure dropping down from the north, and that wedge of northeast wind really starts to cut down the coastline. And this trough is going to remain here because of the remnants of Erica streaming up along it and the way that the pattern is. So this, depending on how close this troughing is where the gradient is going to be the tightest, and that's what happens when you have these northeast winds wedging down into the northern side of these troughs or frontal boundaries. That's where we get our stronger winds built in. So we're going to have to really watch this guy up here as he develops into this weekend. So that will do it for the Chucktown Wind Report. Thank you.